Hey everyone, Sport here with a tips and tricks video on visual approaches and how to generally improve your landings. While this doesn't follow any NATOPS manual or US Air Force publications, this is all based upon my real-world experience as a professional pilot and can be applied to any airframe in DCS, including this T-45 Goshawk by VNAO Simulations, a free mod to the community which is available for download now. One of the things I often see players doing is flying unstabilized approaches, which typically results in catastrophic consequences, such as ending up off the side of the runway, off the end of the runway, or taking a ride in the ejection seat, costing your team an airframe and forcing you to do a lengthy startup procedure again. Hopefully the tips in this video will help you avoid that. So the first thing I want to talk about is the straight-in approach. Right now we're about 15 miles from Nellis Air Force Base at 6,000 feet doing about 330 knots. One of the things people struggle with is knowing when to start slowing down and what the correct flight profile looks like. So the first thing I want to do is establish a 3-degree glide slope. I do this by waiting for the runway to drift onto approximately the 3-degree point on my pitch ladder, then pitching the nose downward so that the flight path vector covers the end of the runway. At the same time, I pull my power back to start slowly decreasing my airspeed while I'm on this descent. If I time this correctly, I want to be fully configured by the time I hit 1,000 feet radar altimeter and be on speed and stabilized by the time I hit 500 feet. A common mistake I see people make is they stay too high for too long, stay too fast, or configure late, not giving themselves enough time to make the small corrections necessary to establish and maintain a stabilized approach. So right now I'm waiting for the aircraft to slow down below my gear down speed of 225 knots. Here it comes. So at 200 knots, I want to introduce half flaps, watching for the balloon as I get the increase in lift, and then returning my flight path vector right back over the runway, maintaining that 3-degree glide slope all the way down. Okay, so there's 1,000 feet radar altimeter. Let's go full flaps, and I'm going to start slowing it back to our target approach speed. And what I'm noticing is that I'm needing more back pressure to maintain that flight path vector on the end of the runway, so I'm adding some nose-up trim in order to alleviate those control forces. At the same time, my E-bracket is now starting to come down to match my flight path vector, so I want to start feeding in a little bit of power to maintain this approach speed and achieve my stabilized approach, which we briefly wanted to have accomplished by the time we hit 500 feet radar altimeter. Now that we're below 500 feet radar altimeter and stabilized, I need to start concentrating on my touchdown point. 1,000 feet beyond the threshold of the runway are two big white squares, which are aiming points that denote the center of the touchdown zone. If my flight path vector starts to drift closer than these aiming markers, I need to add some power and pull back on the stick. At the same time, if the flight path vector moves too far above them, then I need to reduce power and lower the pitch. These things are not mutually exclusive and must be done together. So coming over the overrun, I want to cross the threshold at about 50 feet. At 30 feet, I'm going to bring the nose to the horizon to arrest the descent, but also minimize float, so I touch down exactly on my mark. Now I'm using the rudder pedals to maintain directional control, smoothly applying the brakes and extending the speed brake to maximize drag. And before you know it, you're at taxi speed and can vacate the runway. So now let's look at an example where you might be in a situation where you can't make a stabilized straight-in approach. This is a great case for using the overhead brake. For a great tutorial on how to do an overhead brake in the F-16, check out the top right corner for a video by Tricker. I'll also put a link in the description below. So right now I've realized that I'm too high and too fast to make a good straight-in approach. So instead of trying to salvage it and force a bad approach, which will probably lead to a bad landing, I'm going to enter an initial for a left-hand overhead brake. This allows me a little bit more time to establish myself and take my time to ensure a good, safe landing. So I want to target about 1,000 feet AGL and 330 to 350 knots for a midfield overhead brake. I want to brake at midfield to give myself enough time on downwind to stabilize into my final approach configuration and airspeed so that I can make a nice gentle turn to base and final. Okay, we're coming up to midfield, ready and brake. Okay, let's be honest, overhead brakes always look cooler than a straight-in approach. Right now I'm pulling about 2 to 3 Gs, and I want to end up between 800 and 1,000 feet, 1 mile abeam the runway on downwind. And here we are, I'm at my approach speed, I'm fully configured for landing, and I'm currently trimming to alleviate my control forces to minimize my control inputs needed for my base to final turn. I'm also cross-checking constantly to make sure that my spacing to the runway is good. I'm also checking where my touchdown point is. I want to start my base turn about 45 degrees past where I want to touch down on the runway. That looks good right about there. So I'm going to roll into a 20 to 30 degree bank turn and either maintain altitude or start a very shallow descent so I can intercept that 3-degree glide slope that we talked about on the straight-in approach. This takes a little getting used to, but eventually you'll be able to draw that out in 3 dimensions from your cockpit to your touchdown point. Okay, I'm on base. I have 3 green down and locked. My airspeed is good. My altitude looks good. And I'm making slight adjustments to my angle of bank so that I can smoothly roll out on final without undershooting or overshooting. The goal here is to roll out on about a 1 mile final, 300 feet above the ground. And would you look at that, those aiming markers in the touchdown zone are right at that 3-degree mark on my pitch ladder. I'm on airspeed, and the rest of the approach is just like our straight in. As we come over the overrun here, I'm going to cross the threshold at 50 feet. At 30 feet, I'm going to bring the nose up and pull the power back, and we're going to touch down right on our mark. When you're making spot landings, a greasy smooth landing isn't always what you want, or else you might float too far down the runway. Put it on your mark and make it stick, and I'll show you why coming up next. Alright, so here we are in the F-18. We're on the Syria map and we're approaching Kiryat Shmona Airport. This is commonly used in multiplayer servers such as Blue Flag as an advanced airfield for rearming and refueling. However, I see more people trash airplanes at this airfield than almost any other on the map. Why? Well, because it's short, it's only about 4,000 feet long, it has obstacles on either side, and depending on which way you land, you could be facing a significant downslope. Now the other thing to consider is you don't want to do this heavy. I have about 3,000 pounds of fuel, and most of my munitions are expended. I'm setting myself up on a modified downwind at about 2,000 feet AGL, and I'm just gradually slowing myself down to set myself up for a nice stable approach. Okay, that's about 45 degrees from my touchdown point, so I'm going to start turning base right about here. I'm going to extend the speed brake to get down to my gear speed. Alright, there's 225 knots, gear down. Keeping an eye on my touchdown point, and smoothly slowing down to my final approach speed. So right here, I'm starting to draw that imaginary 3-degree path from my touchdown point to my pitch ladder, and adjusting my flight path vector to match. Alright, here we go. Short final, I'm on airspeed, I'm on glide slope, I'm aiming just for the numbers past the end of the runway there, and I'm making small adjustments to make sure that my glide path is taking me right where I want to touch down. Right about here, I'm going to start decreasing my power. I'm going to pull the nose up and touch down right on the numbers. I'm going to apply maximum braking. We're going to deploy the speed brake and keep that elevator full aft to bury those wheels into the ground. Alright, there you have it. We're down to taxi speed. We can get off the runway, we can rearm, refuel, and get right back into the fight. I hope you enjoyed watching this video and maybe picked up a thing or two that you're going to apply to your next sortie. I'm also going to make sure that I put a link to the download for that T-45 I was flying earlier so you can try it out yourself. What other tips and tricks do you have for fellow DCS users? I welcome all feedback and even suggestions for what you'd like to see in my next video. I'll see you next time.